Hello friends, today we'll start with the very foundation, the very basic of arithmetic, which is the whole numbers. As usual, we'll assume that you are able to answer. If you're able to answer these questions, then you are all set. You don't have to go through this chapter. You can probably skip ahead. If not, then stay with us. We'll try to answer all of these questions. In this chapter, we'll assume that you already know about natural numbers and we'll go on from natural numbers to whole numbers. We'll start with number line and then we'll see how we can do some operations, addition, subtraction, multiplication and division all on whole numbers and what are their properties. Then we'll move on and try to solve some problems, find out shortcut tricks for solving the arithmetic problems. We'll also understand how we can find patterns in numbers and how we can use those patterns to our advantage. So very exciting chapter. Let's start. Let's look at the concept of natural numbers and then from there on we'll move on to the concept of the whole numbers. So here is a set of natural numbers represented on the number line. We all have done this. See, the idea behind natural numbers, why are they so natural, is because we use them in our everyday lives. Even ancient men, they used to use them in their everyday lives for counting. So let's say that they wanted to count the number of animals a person has. They would start from number 1 and then go on to count number 2, 3, 4 and so on and so forth. There was no need to count something which you don't really have. So the counting would always start from number 1 and then go forward. Of course, when we represent the numbers, natural numbers on the number line, there is no number which comes before 1. So before 1, there is nothing. We have represented only numbers till 9. The numbers, natural numbers don't really end there. There are numbers after 9 also. 10, 11, 12, 100, 200. You can go to as large a number, millions, billions, as you possibly can imagine, but the number line and the set of natural numbers would never end. We say that the numbers extend till infinity. So the set of natural numbers is very large. But the thing is, it starts with number 1. For all of these numbers, except number 1, we can say that there is a number which comes before it and there is a number which comes after it. So for all the numbers except 1, there is a predecessor, the number which comes before the number, we call it predecessor, and the number which comes after it, we call it successor. There is a predecessor and a successor for every number except 1. In case of 1, we only have a successor. In the set of natural numbers, there is only a successor. There is no predecessor to number 1. The successor is obviously bigger than the given number. For example, for number 4, the successor is number 5 and it is bigger than the given number. And the predecessor is number 3, which is smaller than the given number or the number 4. For 1, we never needed a successor if we were using the numbers only for counting. But now, as the field of mathematics developed as a subject and people were solving equations, they were just doing mathematics for its own sake, they started using numbers before 1 as well. So then we had to extend our number line and we had to come up with another number, which is the number 0. So number 0 together with all the natural numbers, right? So this is the natural numbers starting from 1 and it goes on till infinity. This is the set of natural numbers. If I add the number 0 to this set, then I get the set of whole numbers. So whole numbers is natural numbers plus 0. Of course, again in the case of whole numbers, so previously we saw the number line for natural numbers. This is the number line for natural numbers. This is the number line for whole numbers. As in the case of natural numbers, this number line of whole numbers also extends beyond number 9, right? We have only shown till number 9, but it extends beyond 9 and it goes, you can create a number as large as possibly you can imagine in millions, billions and so on and so forth. So this number line of whole numbers also extends till infinity. So now hope it's clear how do we go from natural numbers, the numbers that we usually use in counting, which start from 1, to the set of whole numbers? How do we get there? You might be wondering that 0, for the sake of it, it has been created only for the sake of it, and there is no real application for number 0. But no, that is not the case. In our modern life, we use number 0 pretty extensively. So think about it. Here is a car which is running on a road, it is flying on a road, and we have milometers set at various places. As the car crosses a milometer, we know that the car has crossed that much of a distance, covered that much of a distance. So if it crosses the milometer at 1, we know that the car has covered a distance of 1 kilometer or 1 mile, whatever it represents. Similarly, if it has crossed the milometer of 5, we know that that much distance the car has really covered. What about the reading inside the car when it is just starting? So what about the reading at this point when it is just starting? In case of natural numbers, we don't really have a way to represent this point, the beginning point. We can, however, represent it with 0, as is the case of whole numbers. So 0 we get only from the whole numbers, and now we really have a use for it in modern day gadgets, in modern day mathematics. So we remove everything else and we convert this back to our number line, this representation back to our number line. This is the number line of whole numbers. Now let's look at the number line in little more detail. Let's see what all things we can understand from this number line. The first thing to note is that the distance between any two numbers, for example 0 and 1, 2 and 3, this distance is always the same. This distance is always the same all across the number line. The second thing to note is how do we do operations on this number line. If you want to add two numbers, let's say that I want to add 2 and 3. So I want to do an operation 2 plus 3. How would I go about doing this on number line? The first thing I'll do is that I'll start with number 2. This is the point I'll start with. And then I'll count 3 from there. So this is 1, 2, and then 3. And thus I would reach the number 5. So that would be my answer. So this is how we do the addition on the number line. What about subtraction? How would we do that? Let's say that I want to do 5 minus 3 on the number line. How would I do that? I would start with number 5. This is where I would start with. And from here, I would count backwards. So I would count towards the left of number line 3 times. So that is the amount I want to subtract. So I'll go backwards 3 times and thus I would reach number 2. So this is the way I would do subtraction on the number line. Greater than relation on the number line is represented as we move towards the right. So the numbers towards the right are always bigger than the numbers towards the left. The less than relation is represented on the number line as we go towards the left. So for example, 3 is less than 4, 3 is towards the left of 4. And indeed, all the numbers to the left of 4 are less than the number 4 itself. Now we come on to the very important, the next operation, which is the operation of multiplication. And how do we do that on number line? See, multiplication is represented by jumps. So for example, if I want to multiply 2 with 3, which means, this actually means that I want to add 2 3 times. This is what it really means. I want to add 2 3 times. So to do that, I would start with number 0 and then I would jump 3 times by amount equal to 2. So I would jump 3 times by an amount equal to 2. So first jump I take, I go to 2. Second jump I take, I go to 4. And third jump I take, I go to 6. Notice that the jumps we are taking is actually skipping by 2, or is just the table of 2. So it's 2 ones are 2, I reach 2, 2 twos are 4, I reach 4, 2 threes are 6, and that's where I end it, right? So that's what 3 times I made 3 jump. First jump, second jump, and third jump. So this is how we do the multiplication. So multiplication is actually jumping on the number line. Now we have introduced a new friend, our number 0, which has suddenly become very, very important for us in the case of whole numbers. To understand the history of zero, historically, like very, even in ancient, very, very ancient times, the concept of nothingness was actually there, but they didn't know how to represent it mathematically. So they understood that there was something of nothing, there was a concept of nothingness, there was something called a nothing, but they didn't represent it in the form of numbers. If someone didn't have any animals, of course he didn't have them, but they did not know to say that he had zero animals. They did not know that. The first time the number zero was used mathematically by an Indian mathematician, Aryabhatta. He invented zero. The way he used it was not only to actually represent the concept of nothingness itself, but to actually devise the place value system of decimal. See, the number 1, when we just write it as such in the units place, its value is 1. The same number, if I move it and I write it in the tens place, its value becomes 10 times. So from 1, it becomes, the value really becomes 10. And I am left with an empty digit here. Aryabhatta was the first one to really state that instead of writing this as a dash, leaving it empty, we can put 0 here. And he was the one who to think that everything would just work consistently if we were to put 0 here instead of just leaving it empty. Later on, Brahmagupta, he actually devised more mathematical systems around the number 0. He was an Indian astronomer and mathematician. He devised a symbol for 0, how to write it below each of the digits. He did that. He also devised equations. How would the equations behave when I use 0? How would addition, subtraction, multiplication, how would those work with 0 as a number? So he gave 0 a complete importance. He gave it all the properties that other numbers really had. He made it equal to the other numbers. So now we understood natural numbers and whole numbers. Let's understand the concept of sets of numbers or collections of numbers. So here I have all the numbers written from 0 to 9. Again, I would like to emphasize that the natural numbers or whole numbers don't really stop at 9. We have numbers beyond 9 also, but here for our representation we have just used these 9 digits, these 10 digits, number still 9. So if I want to talk about natural numbers, let's say that this is my bucket of natural numbers. All the numbers starting from 1 would really go into that bucket. That would be the collection of all the numbers starting from 1 onwards. So that is my natural numbers. My set of whole numbers is all the numbers starting from 0 onwards. So this is my set of whole numbers. It starts from 0 and goes on, of course, till infinity. This is something which is very important, and if there is one thing that you need to understand from this class, it is this thing, that 0 is only there in case of whole numbers. It is not there in the case of natural numbers, in the set of natural numbers. Another very important thing, very, very important thing from this class is, I can represent the set of whole numbers as the set of natural numbers plus number 0. Now, based on that knowledge, we can cover some problems on natural numbers and whole numbers. See, the very first problem that we have is 0 is the smallest natural number. So we are on the first problem. Each of the problem is either true or false. See, 0 is not a smallest natural number. It's not a natural number at all. It is a whole number. 400 is predecessor of number 399. Predecessor means number which comes before. Predecessor of 399 would be number 398. So this is actually false. This is also false. 0 is the smallest whole number. That is correct. 0 is the smallest whole numbers. Whole numbers do not go below 0, right? So below 0 there are other numbers which exist there, but 0, the whole numbers only go on till 0. So 0 is the smallest possible whole number. 600 is successor of 599, which is correct. So if I go to 599 and I want to write the successor of 599, it would be 600. That is the number which comes after 599. All natural numbers are whole numbers. So let's look at our equation right here. All natural numbers are whole numbers. It is correct, right? Because I pick any natural number, it would be a whole number, 100%. That is true. So this thing is actually correct. All whole numbers are natural numbers. That is incorrect, because 0 is a whole number, but it is not a natural number. Predecessor of a 2-digit number is never a single digit number. That is actually incorrect, because I have a number 10 whose predecessor, a number which comes before it, is number 9, which is a single digit number. 1 is the smallest whole number. That is wrong, because 0 is the actually smallest whole number. Natural number 1 has no predecessor. That is correct, because in case of 1, the number line ends at the number 1. So before 1 we have nothing. The natural number line would end at 1. So natural number 1 has no predecessor. Whole number 1 of course has a predecessor, because the number line for whole numbers does not end at 1. There is a number 0 right here. Whole number 13 lies between 11 and 12. Completely incorrect. Between 11 and 12 we don't really have another whole number. So 13 actually lies even beyond 12. It is a successor of number 12. Whole number 0 has no predecessor. That is correct, because 0 is the last or the minimum whole number. After that we don't before that we don't really have any other whole numbers. Successor of 2-digit number is always a 2-digit number. That is also incorrect. 99 is a number. Its successor is number 100. So I have a 2-digit number 99. Its successor is really a 3-digit number. So if you remember the 2 rules I told you, all these problems come naturally to you, and they become very, very easy to solve. Let's start with a very important property, which is the closure property of whole numbers for addition, or in other words, closure property of addition over whole numbers. So it is so many words, but all this property really means is that if I take any 2 whole numbers and I do addition over those, then my answer would necessarily be a whole number. We already said that all the whole numbers, if we take all of them, we can put them in a collection or in a bucket, in a set, and we can put them in a set. This is our set of whole numbers. What my closure property is saying is that if I take any 2 whole numbers from this set, let's say that I took 2 numbers 6 and 2, and if I were to add these 2, 6 and 2, the answer would be 8, then necessarily my answer would also be a whole number. So it would fall back in the collection, in the set of whole numbers. Just by doing addition, I cannot addition of 2 whole numbers, I cannot leave this bucket. I would necessarily, my answer would fall in this bucket of whole numbers. My answer can be very large, it can be very small. Those things are allowed, but the answer would have to be a whole number. So that is the closure property of addition over whole numbers. Let's just summon our number line and try to understand why this property actually holds. So here is our number line. We have seen this example that if I take 2 whole numbers, 6 plus 2, the answer is 8. We know that in the case of this addition of 2 whole numbers, 6 and 2, the answer of course 100% is a whole number. If I were to do an operation on 2 whole numbers, my answer will not be a whole number in 2 ways. Okay, so there are only 2 ways in which I would not get a whole number. Okay, those 2 ways are if my answer were to fall between 2 whole numbers. So here is 2 whole numbers 6 and 7, and if I did an operation on some whole numbers and if my answer were to fall between 6 and 7, then that answer would not be a whole number. The second way to get a non-whole number answer would be if I got an answer less than 0. So I did an operation and that results in an answer which is less than 0, then I would fall off the number line of whole number, and in that case my answer would not be a whole number. So those are the only 2 ways I can get a non-whole number answer. In case of addition, the way it works just by the nature of addition is that we start with number 6. So that is our addition, 6 plus 2 is equal to 8. The way it works is we start with number 6 and then we take two jumps, 1 and 2, right? Because we have the number 2 here, so we make two jumps and we come to number 8. Just by the nature of this addition, since we are only jumping by whole number amounts, I can never land in the middle of this number line. I can never end up here. Okay, so because of that, my answer would always end up being a whole number. Second thing is, just by doing the addition, I am always moving forward in the number line. I can produce a very large whole number. That is of course allowed, because our number line, it extends till infinity. So I can produce large numbers using addition, but I can never produce a number less than 0. So I can never go on this side just by doing addition. So my addition would always take me towards the right on the number line. It can never take me to the left of 0. Just by virtue of this property of addition of whole numbers, the number on this number line, we can see that the whole number, addition of whole numbers, would always produce other whole numbers. It can never produce a non-whole number answer, and that is why this addition is actually closed over whole numbers. What happens in case of multiplication? In case of multiplication also, the operation of multiplication is closed over whole numbers. So that is again true. Again, we start with our set of all whole numbers. We have shown the whole numbers only till 9, but remember that there are infinitely many whole numbers. There are very many whole numbers, and those are also in this bucket. So all of those whole numbers are in this bucket or in this set. So again, this is our set of whole numbers. We start by taking two whole numbers from this set. Let's say that this time we took two whole numbers, 2 and 4, and we multiplied those two together. This answer 8 that we get as a result of that multiplication of two whole numbers would again necessarily be a whole number. So multiplication of whole numbers is also closed. We can never get out from this set of whole numbers just by doing multiplication of two whole numbers. So that is not possible. Our answer would necessarily end up being a whole number. Again, let's just summon our number line. Let's just bring our number line and understand why this happens to be true. It is very simple again, right? So let's just take an example, 2 into 3. Right? So we took a slightly different example this time. What does it really mean? It means that I would have to make jumps of 2 3 times. So I start with 0. I make the first jump of 2. I make the second jump of 2. And I make the third jump of 2. So this is my first jump, this is my second jump, this is my third jump, and I end up at my answer, which is 6. So if you notice again, these jumps only take us to points which are whole numbers. So I can again, just by doing these jumps, I can never end up at a point which is between two whole numbers. As long as my jumps are whole numbers, my numbers that I am multiplying are whole numbers, I can never end up between two whole numbers. Again, these jumps can, if I am using the whole numbers, if I am multiplying two whole numbers, these jumps can never take me below 0. The only thing is I can only go forward, I can only go towards the right by doing these jumps, and therefore multiplication also is closed over whole numbers. So now we understand why addition and multiplication are actually closed over whole numbers. Again, very, very important properties. You should always, you can expect some questions on these. So this is the summary of the multiplication and addition and why they are actually closed over whole numbers. Another way to look at multiplication is that it is repeated addition. We are adding again and again, and that is what multiplication is. Since addition is closed, therefore multiplication has to be closed over whole numbers. Now let's see two other operations. First we'll see subtraction, then we'll see division, and understand whether they are also closed over whole numbers or not. So let's first start with subtraction. Is subtraction actually closed over whole numbers? Let's just summon our number line. Let's just bring it and see what happens. Here is a very simple subtraction that we are doing. I am doing 2 minus 1. So let's say that I started with 2 ice creams and now I am left with only 1 ice cream. One of them actually melted away. In the end, how many ice creams would I have? I would have just 1 ice cream left with me. One of them, I had 2 ice creams, 1 melted. Now I am left with only 1. Very simple. the way this addition, this subtraction actually happens on a number line is, I start with number 2, that is my starting point, and then I move left by 1. So this is how this subtraction actually progresses. So I do -1, and the number where I end up, this number is my answer. So 1 is my answer. So this is where I end up, and that is my answer. If you look at this subtraction, you might think that, oh, I started with 2 whole numbers. These 2 and 1, they are whole numbers. These are whole numbers. And my answer also happens to be a whole number. So you might think that, oh, the subtraction also is closed with respect to whole numbers. But of course, we would be completely wrong. If I do the subtraction of 2 minus 1 and I end up with a whole number, what happens if I do a subtraction of 1 minus 2? That is also a valid subtraction, because 1 and 2 both are whole numbers, and I am subtracting 1 minus 2. I am doing a subtraction operation on them. So in this case, what is my answer? So let's again look at the number line and see what happens. So in this case, I start with number 1. So this is where I would start with. I start with number 1, and then I go back not 1 but 2 places. So I go back 1 place and I end up at 0. I go back 1 more place after 0, right? So this is to the left of 0. We are going even below 0 in this case. And this is where our number line actually does not exist. The number line for whole numbers ends here. So this location is not on our number line of whole numbers. Those of you who already have studied ahead would know that the answer in this case is actually -1, which is not a whole number. So subtraction of 2 whole numbers does not lead to a whole number, and therefore the subtraction is not actually closed with respect to whole numbers. Now let's understand what happens in case of division. So before we do that, we need to understand division as repeated subtraction. So what does it really mean? It means that, let's say I have a number 12, that is the number I would start with, number 12, and this is the division operation I am doing. I am I am dividing 12 by 3. So this is what I am doing. Answer we already know is 4. So this much we already know. Let's understand how we can arrive at this answer, the number 4, just by doing repeated subtraction. So the way I do it is, so this is my dividend and this is my divisor. I repeatedly subtract my divisor from my dividend. So this is my dividend and I subtract my divisor. So first I do 12 minus 3. I end up with number 9. Then I do 9 minus 3 again. So I repeatedly subtract the divisor from what I have left with. And then I am left with 6. Then I again take this number 6 and I subtract my divisor. I am left with number 3. Then I again take this number 3 and I subtract 3 from it, and I am left with 0. So I continue this subtraction until whatever I am left with is actually less than my divisor. So because this 0 is less than our divisor 3, we would stop here. If I was left with 1 or 2 here, then also I would have actually stopped, because 0, 1, 2, all of those 3 numbers are actually less than 3. I cannot remove any more 3's from it. So at that point, I would stop. The number of subtractions that I have done, okay, so I have done how many subtractions? 1, 2, 3, 4. This actually happens to be my quotient. And whatever I am left with in the end, the very last, after the very last subtraction, is actually my remainder r. So in this case, our quotient is 4 and our remainder is actually 0. So this is the subtraction, division as repeated subtraction. Now let's understand whether this division of whole numbers is closed or not. Again, we summon our number line and we try to understand what happens in the case of division. So the very first thing that we will do is rather simple. We'll just show that the division is actually not closed over whole numbers. And the way we show it is, we take 2 whole numbers, 1 and 2, and we do 1 divided by 2. This can be written as half. I took two whole numbers 1 and 2, and my answer half is actually between these two whole numbers 0 and 1, and this is where my half actually falls. So this answer half is not a whole number. It falls between these two whole numbers. This answer half is not whole number. So right off the bat, right in the beginning, we have simply shown that if I divide two whole numbers, I can come up with cases where my answer would not be a whole number. So therefore, the division over whole numbers is not closed. Then let's take a little bit complicated example. Let's take another case which is slightly complicated, which is slightly difficult, but not altogether that much difficult, and see and again understand why the division is actually not closed. So in this case, we also take two whole numbers. I am taking two whole numbers 2 and 0, and I am doing 2 divided by 0, and we are trying to understand what our quotient and remainder would be in this case. So we start with 2 divided by 0. We know that the division is actually repeated subtraction, and the way we do it is we repeatedly subtract our dividend, which is our divisor, which is 0, from our dividend, which is 2. So I would do 2 minus 0, and I would repeatedly do that until the number that I get is actually less than 0, less than or equal to 0. So this is my first subtraction. I am doing it 2 minus 0, and the answer comes out to be 2. I again take this 2. I again do this subtraction 2 minus 0. I again subtract the divisor from the dividend, right? 2 minus 0. I again do that. My answer again comes out to be 2. If I continue like this, my answer always comes out to be 2. This division would actually never end. I would never arrive at a result here which is less than or equal to 0. So I would never arrive at a number here which is less than 0. So this division would not end. I want you to understand, this is very important, that division by 0 never ends. We can never arrive at an answer. It is not that the division by 0 is very difficult or it is infinity. No, that is not the case. Division by 0 is completely not defined. Division by 0, we can never do that. Even the fastest computer in the world cannot do, the most powerful computer in the world cannot do division by 0. It is not defined at all. Okay, it is not 1, it is not 0, it is not infinity, it is not at all defined. I take any whole number, I divide it by 0, the answer is not defined, which means that this not defined does not fall on our number line of whole numbers. So we have taken two whole numbers, n and 0, 2 and 0 specifically, and we were able to produce a number which is not defined, okay, and that does not fall on our number line. That is not a whole number, and that is second reason why the division is not closed with respect to whole numbers. To get, this is so important that division by 0 is not defined, that let's just look at in a little more detail. Let's just look at in another way. So here we'll look at division in the form of dividing things into groups. So here I have total of 6 items and I am dividing them into 2 buckets. So this is 6 is my dividend and this 2 is my divisor. So I am doing the operation 6 divided by 2, and the quotient in this case would be the number of balls which are there, which end up in one bucket. So I am doing the division of balls into the buckets. I put 1, and the number of balls which are there in one bucket finally, that in this case is 3, is my quotient. What happens if I have just one bucket and total of 6 balls? In this case, I am doing 6 divided by 1, and you would say that all the buckets, all the balls end up in just one bucket, and that of course is my quotient. So 6 is my quotient. Now what happens if I don't have bucket at all? In this case, I don't really have any place to put my balls. Okay, so since I cannot put these balls anywhere, there are no buckets, I cannot do the division itself, right? So division by 0, if I have 0 bucket, right? So this I am doing 6 divided by 0. I have 0 buckets, okay? And in this case, the division, I am not able to do the division at all. So this division is completely not defined. It is not defined at all. Okay. So with this, we conclude that division of whole numbers is not defined because of two reasons. The first reason is that I can create conditions by taking two whole numbers where the division would fall in the middle of two whole numbers. And second, by taking a whole number and dividing it by 0, I can produce a number which is not defined. And this not defined result is not really a whole number. So because of these two reasons, division is not closed over whole numbers. Let's look at two very important properties of addition and multiplication in case of whole numbers. The first one is the additive identity. What does it mean? It means that it only applies to the number 0 first of all. So 0 is known as the additive identity of whole numbers. It means that if I add any number to 0, I get the number itself. So for example, if I add 2 to 0, I get 2 itself. If I add 3 to 0, I get 3 itself. So 0 is just like a mirror. It just reflects the number to which it is added on the other side. Similarly, 1 is the multiplicative identity. So 1 in case of multiplication acts just like a mirror. It just reflects whatever is the other operand of multiplication. It just reflects it as the answer. So if let's say that I had a very large number, let's say 1 million, and I multiply it by 1, the answer that I would get is again 1 million itself. Right? So you don't really have to do this multiplication at all. You can simply write the operand as the other operand as the final result when multiplying by 1. So this is known as multiplicative identity. Another important property of 0 is the multiplication property of 0. So this is a slightly different property. What does it mean? It means that if I multiply any number with 0, the answer would be 0 itself, right? Which is very, very understandable, right? But we just have to remember the name. So this is known as multiplication property of 0. If I multiply a very large number, again, we don't really have to do the multiplication. This very large number, when multiplied by 0, would yield 0 itself. So I can simply write the answer as 0. So those three properties are important, and number of problems can be solved based on those two properties. The very first problem is, of course, if let's say that the product of two whole numbers, let's say there are two whole numbers, n and m. Their product, if I multiply them together, the answer that I get is 0. So this much I know. What can I say about these numbers? See, the thing is, 0, we said, has the multiplicative property of 0. It means that this answer can be 0 if either n is 0, or m is 0, or n, m both are 0. So in either of those three cases, my answer would be 0. This is due to the multiplication property of 0. The second problem is that if I have two whole numbers, their product as 1. So I said that these two whole numbers, again we take any two whole numbers, n into m, and their answer happens to be 1. So this time it is not 0, it is 1. What can we say about the numbers? See, the thing is, 1 is the multiplicative identity. So one of them I can say is, let's say 1. The other, then I can write n into 1 is equal to n itself. So this number would simply be reflected on the other side because 1 is the multiplicative identity. For this n to be equal to 1, for this answer to be equal to 1, this n has to be equal to 1. Right? So if the product of two whole numbers is 1, the two whole numbers each have to be 1. Right? So both n and m have to be equal to 1. Only in that case can the product be a whole number. Right? That is if n and m are whole numbers, and their product can be 1. Right? So their product can be 1 only if both n and m are 1. Of course, if n and m are not whole numbers, then we can come up with numerous other combinations where answer can be 1. But if the two numbers n and m, their product is 1 and n and m are whole numbers, then they each have to be equal to 1. Let's look at the commutativity of addition of whole numbers. So before we look at this property of whole numbers, the commutativity property of whole numbers, let's just understand a little bit of terminology. So here I have an addition 3 plus 4 equal to 7. In case of this addition, we have a plus which is the operator. So this plus is the operator. And this operator is actually working on two operands. So this 3 and 4 are the two operands. Okay. In case of commutativity, what it means is that if I change the order of operands around an operator, if I interchange the operands around an operator, my final answer does not change. So that's what commutativity actually means. So here I did 3 plus 4 and the answer was 7. Now I am doing 4 plus 3, right? So earlier I did that, and now I am doing 4 plus 3 and my answer would again come out to be 7. So just by interchanging the operands around this operator plus, my answer actually remained the same. So this is what commutativity is. I commuted the two operands around an operator and my answer remained the same. It did not change. Of course, intuitively we know that this property must hold. Why? Well, think about it. I went to a market. I went to first shop. I got 4 ice creams. From the second shop, I got 3 ice creams. So total number of ice creams is 7. Now, if I went to the first shop and brought 4 ice creams, and from the second shop I brought 3 ice creams, the total number of ice creams would remain the same in 7. Okay, so the order of the operands 4 and 3 actually did not make a material difference to my total number of ice creams. They remained 7 in either case. But intuitively we know that this property must work, but let's just understand this on number line. So we have summoned our number line right here. Let's just do the first operation. 3 plus 4 is equal to 7 on the number line. So I started with 3 and I made 4 jumps very simply and I ended up at 7. So we know that the answer would be 7. What happens in the case of the second sum, which is 4 plus 3 is equal to 7. So in this case, I would start with 4. So I started with a greater number, but I am making lesser number of jumps. So I am making only 3 jumps. My final answer would remain 7 in this case also. So our commutativity actually works in case of addition. Actually holds true in case of addition of whole numbers. What about associativity? What does it actually mean? Associativity means, so for associativity, we need at least 3 operands. So in this case, these are my 3 operands. So it is 3, 4 and 2, and we need at least 2 operators. So we have 2 operators, 2 pluses right here. Associativity means that this middle operand I can associate with either this operator or I can associate with this operator. The answer would not change. So that's what associativity actually means. In commutativity, we change the order of operands around an operator. In associativity, we are completely changing the operands themselves. That is the first thing. Second is that commutativity, there was a single, so if you remember commutativity, there was a single operator. In associativity, we need at least 2 operators. In commutativity, we needed only 2 operands. Associativity, at least 3 operands. And in associativity, we associate the middle operand differently, either with one operator or the other operator. And our answer remains the same in both the cases. So let's just check whether the associativity holds or not. So let's just make sure that associativity actually works. So first, we'll associate the our operand this way, and my sum, my expression in this case becomes 3 plus 4 plus 2, which comes out to be 3 plus 6, which is equal to 9. In the second case, I would associate the middle operand, the 4, with this plus. So it would become 3 plus 4 plus this 2 will remain alone. And in this case, the answer would come out to be 7 plus 2, which is equal to 9. Of course, we expected the answer to be the same, and it ended up being the same in both the cases. So associativity holds true. Now let's look at multiplication, the associativity and commutativity of multiplication. But before we do that, let's just understand a way of doing the multiplication, a way of representing the multiplication. So here I have a total of 12 balls. So, okay, so that is given. I have arranged them in the form of 3 rows and 4 columns. Okay, and now I am going to do multiplication on them. The way to look at it is I have 1, 2 and 3 rows of 4 balls each. So my multiplication would be 3 into 4, which is equal to 12. That is the one way to understand this multiplication. Another way to understand this multiplication, and that is sometimes known as a tape method, and that method is to actually look at the balls column wise. So we would now look at these balls column wise and see what my multiplication actually becomes. So this is the column wise. I am going like this. So column wise I am writing the total. So this is 3, and then in the next one also we have 3. In the next one we also have 3, and this one also we have 3. So I have a total of 4 3s. So again I would write it as 3 into 4, which is equal to 12. No matter whether you use row into column or whether you use the tape method, the answer in both cases would come out to be 3 into 4, which is the row into column in case of the multiplication. So multiplication is always row into column. So now we would use that particular way of representing the multiplication to understand commutativity of multiplication. Okay, so again we have our multiplication, our total number of balls. We have it arranged in the form of 3 rows and 4 columns. Okay, but now we just divide it into 2 parts. So first we look at only this part, only the first one, and we see that our total number of balls would be 3 into 4. I have 3 rows and 4 columns. The total number of balls would be 3 into 4, which is equal to 12. In the second case, in this case, I am not changing the number of balls. We have kept the number of balls constant, but we'll apply a small transformation to this pattern. I just rotate it, and now what I have 4 rows and 3 columns. So now my multiplication would become 4 into 3. Of course, because I have not changed the number of balls, my total number of balls should still remain 12. So in this way, we have proved that multiplication also is commutative. Just by changing the order of the 2 operands around the multiplication sign, we do not change the result. The result remains the same, whether it's 3 into 4 or 4 into 3. So that was the commutativity. Of course, just by looking at the number line, we have summoned our number line, we can also draw that conclusion. So in this case, let's look at the multiplication 2 into 3. What happens? So I start in the first case, I start with 2 and I start with 0 in both the cases, but in the first case, I am making 3 jumps of 2 each. So I start with 0 and I make first jump, second jump and third jump. In the second case, what I would do is 3 into 2. So in this case, I would make 2 jumps of 3 each. So I start with 0, I make my first jump, I come to 3, I make my second jump and I come to 6. So in both the cases, my answer remains the same. I end up being at 6. So just by changing the operands around the operator multiplication, we cannot change the result remains the same, and hence the multiplication is also commutative with respect to whole numbers. Now let's move on to a very important property, which is the associativity of multiplication of whole numbers. So as we have seen in the case of addition, even in the case of multiplication, the associative property actually holds true. So what does that mean? Let's just write an expression and express this associative property. So this is the multiplication. We have 3 operands and 2 operators. So similar to what we have seen in the case of addition, the result of this multiplication does not change whether I associate this middle operand 3 with this operator or with this operator. So in either case, my result would really be the same. So let's just write an expression for both of these associations. So whether I do this multiplication or I do this multiplication, my result does not really change. So that is what the associative property actually means. Let's just compute the answer and see whether it is really true or not. So if I compute the answer here, this becomes 2 into 12, which is equal to 24. Indeed, we could have guessed that actually. Now let's just compute the answer on the other side and see what do we get. So this is 3 to the 6. 6 into 4, this again is 24. So indeed, associative property holds true, and we are able to see that, we have able to verify that with some kind of calculations, that the answer does not really change whether I associate the middle operand with the first operator or the second operator. So now that we have understood the associative property and we have seen that it indeed holds valid, let's just get an intuitive understanding of why that is so. Why does the associative property actually holds? So we'll make use of this figure, which has a total of 24 balls. Okay, so this figure has total of 24 balls. This one on the left or this one on the right, both have 24 balls. So number of balls does not really change. We'll just change the way in which we count the balls. Of course, you understand that just by changing the way in which I count the balls should not really affect the number of balls in the figure. So in the first figure, let's just remove one of them. In this figure, we'll focus on this figure on the right first. Here we'll just use our standard method of counting. We'll count the number of rows, which we know is 3, into the number of columns, which we know is 4. So that is the number of baskets that we have, right? Number of baskets is how much? 3 into 4. That is the number of baskets. And of course, each of the baskets has how many balls? 2 balls. So this is the kind of expression I can write for the number of balls in this figure. Now just let's move on to the other figure and count the things a little differently. So here we have, I highlighted this column. Okay, we'll count the number of balls in this column. This column has total of 3 baskets and each of those baskets has 2 balls. So total, this column has 2 into 3 balls. Similarly, this column also has 2 into 3 balls. This column also has 2 into 3 balls. And this column also has 2 into 3 balls. How many columns do I have of 2 into 3 balls each? So that is, we can simply write that is equal to 2. Sorry, we'll just rub this away. So that is equal to 2 into 3. How many columns do I have of this 2 into 3 balls? You can count it. 1, 2, 3 and 4. So that is equal to 2 into 3 into 4. So the number of balls we know is same in each of these figures. Therefore, these two expressions are exactly equivalent, giving us proving the associative property of multiplication. So that was an intuitive, that this figure helped us get an intuitive feel for why the associative property of multiplication actually holds true. Mind you, previously we had proved the commutative property of multiplication, which had to do with the order of operands around an operator. Associative property, as we saw, has to do more with the association of the middle operator with either middle operand with either the first operator or with the second operator. Okay, so the commutativity is about the order of the operands around an operator. So here we'll look at whether subtraction is commutative or not. The subtraction that we use is very simple. Let's say that I had 4 ice creams, and from that 3 ice creams actually melted away. Okay, Okay, so very unfortunate incident happened, and now I am left with just one ice cream. Okay, so 4 minus 3 is 1. We all know that. Let's just look at the number line and prove that. Okay, so we start with number 4. This is 4 minus 3. So we go back 3 places, 1, 2 and 3, and of course we end up at 1. So that is the 4 minus 3 equal to 1. That is our expression. We'll just write it here also one more time. What happens if we commute the operands around this operator minus? So let's just commute the operands. What would happen? I will interchange the position of 4 and 3. So what kind of expression would I get then? I would get an expression 3 minus 4. What does that mean? It means that I started out with 3 ice creams and 4 of them got melted away. Of course, you would say that it does not really make sense in real life. So just ignore that for a second and then just bear with me. So if we did 3 minus 4, what would happen? So in this case, we start with the number 3, that is where we are starting from, and we'll go back 4 positions. So we'll go 1, 2, 3 and 4. So we'll go even below 0. Okay, 1 below 0. So for those of you who have studied ahead, know that the answer in this case is minus 1. So if we commute the operands, if we change the order of operands around this minus sign, our answer actually changes. In first case it was 1, in the second case it is minus 1, which proves that the subtraction is indeed not commutative. What about subtraction being associative? Is it associative? So we seen that addition is both commutative and associative. Subtraction is not commutative. Let's just now understand whether it is associative or not. So here I have a very simple expression, 4 minus 2 minus 1, right? Very simple. This is simple subtraction. Again, to use the associative property, what we'll do is that we'll take the middle operand and first we'll associate it with this first operator. So this becomes 4 minus 2 minus 1, and if we compute this, this comes out to be 4 minus 2 is 2, 2 minus 1, and this is just 1. Now we will associate the middle operand with the second operator, and in this case what will we get? We'll get 4 minus 2 minus 1. So we'll do 2 minus 1 first, and this gives us 4 minus 1, which is just equal to 3. So this one, depending upon how I associate the middle operand, this 2, my result actually changes, which means that subtraction is indeed not associative. So subtraction is neither commutative nor associative. What about division? Is it commutative? Let's just again take a simple example. So here we have a simple example, 4 divided by 2. What happens if I commute the operands? I change the order of operands. I get another division, 2 divided by 4. Let's see if these two are indeed equivalent. So here 4 divided by 2 we know is just 2. Very simple division. 2 divided by 4, I'll write it as 2 by 4, which is equal to actually half. So depending upon the order of operands, my answer, my division actually gives me different answers. So division is not commutative. Very simple. Now let's move on to the last sort of property, which is the whether division is associative or not. In this case, we'll again use a very simple division to prove that division is not associative. So this is our simple division, 12 divided by 4 and then divided by 2. First I'll associate 4 with this division and I'll get this expression, 12 divided by 4 divided by 2. Let's just solve it. So 12 divided by 4 is 3. So this becomes 3 divided by 2. This comes out to be 3 by 2. Let's just now associate the 4 differently. We'll associate it with the second operator. So the procedure is same. That's what associativity means. It remains the meaning of associativity does not depend upon the operator, right? So in every case we are doing the same exercise. So we'll associate it with this operator and we'll get the expression 12 divided by 4 divided by 2. So in this case, the answer is actually very simple because it's 4 divided by 2 is actually 2 and this comes out to be 6. More importantly, the answer in the two cases is actually different. So in one case we got 3 by 2, in other case we got 6, depending upon how we associated the middle operand. Therefore, yes, whether division is associative or not. So division is not associative. It is not associative because we are getting different answer based on whether we are associating this 4 with the first operand or with the first operator or with the second operator. Now that we have seen the commutative and associativity of different operations, okay, and we have proved that it is only the addition and multiplication are commutative and associative. Division and subtraction are neither commutative nor associative. So we have proved that. Now just let's do some sums using the associative and the commutative property. In each of these questions, our objective is to make our job easier by using the commutative and the associative property. So that is our objective. So here, if I were to directly do this sum by using the BODMAS, I would do 14 plus 17 first, which would be a little bit complicated. So I would make my job a little easy by actually using the commutative property first. Okay, so first I use commutative property on these operands. Okay, these two, this operator, around this operator I would use the commutative property, and I get an expression 14 plus 6 plus 17. Okay, so this order of 6 and 17 we actually changed by using the commutative property. Now we will use the associative property to actually associate this 6 with the first operator. So we will do this 14 plus 6 first, and the answer in this case comes out to be 20 plus 17. Notice that by doing 14 plus 6 first, we were able to produce a number which had 0 in the units place. So this makes our job easier, because now it is very easy to add this 20 and 17 in the units place. All I have to do is 7 plus 0, which makes it 7, and in the tens place is 2 plus 1, which makes it 3. So just by producing this 0, I made my job very easy, and that is the objective in each of these questions. We'll make our job easier by, in the case of addition, we'll produce zeros. In the case of multiplication also, we'll produce zeros, as many zeros as possible. So let's now take an example of how we would use the associative and commutative property to simplify this sum, this arithmetic, okay, this calculation. So here it is 12 into 35. So obviously 12 into 35, doing it directly would take us some time. So what we'll do is that we'll break this 12. We'll write it as 6 into 2, and we'll break this 35 as well. We'll write it as 5 into 7. I can do that, right? I know that 35 is 7 5 is 35. Now we'll use the associative property to associate this 2 with this operator and this 5 also with this operator. So we'll do this calculation first. At the same time, we will multiply these two terms. Okay, so when I do this multiplication, I get 5 2s are 10, and when I do this multiplication, the outside ones, I get 42. Thing to note here is that when I multiply a number which has 5 in the units place with an even number, I get a 0 in the units place. So that is the property that we have used. Even number multiplied with a number with 5 in the units digit gives us a product which has 0 in the units digit. And that makes our job very easy, because multiplying with this 0, all it means is that I have to carry this 0 directly as is, and I have to multiply this 42 with the digit here, which in this case is just 1. So this 42 into 1 gives me 42. So this is just 42 into 42, and then 0 is carried as it is. So with that 0 in the units place, my multiplication became very much simpler, and that was because I used the commutative and associative properties of multiplication to my advantage. We'll do the same trick here. We'll again use this 5 and multiply. Instead of multiplying it with 3, we'll multiply it with an even number. We have 6 in this multiplication right here. So first we will commute 3 and 5 around this operator. So we get 6 into 5 into 3, and then we'll associate this 5 with this multiplication. So we get 6 into 5 into 3. So this becomes 6 5s are 30, 30 into 3, and this of course 3 3s are 9, 0 comes as is. Okay. Again, just by producing this 0, we made our multiplication, our task, that much more easier. Now just let's move on to the final example. Again, it might look a little bit complicated, but it is so simple if you use the properties intelligently. Here, what we have to do is that we have to again use the commutativity and associativity. So what we do first is we use commutativity and interchange these two, the position of these two operands. So we get 8 into 125 into 1769. Then we use associativity to associate this 125 with this operator, the first one. 8 into 125 is just 1000 and 1769 comes as is. Now the thing is, when in this multiplication, this 1000 actually comes as is. So the zeros of the 1000 just come as is, and this 1769 is multiplied by just 1. So this 16769 just gets carried over right here, and that is my final answer. So we have not produced 1, 2, but 3 zeros, and that has made our job very easy in this case. Okay, so by using the commutative and associative properties, we can devise shortcuts to lot of these arithmetic questions, and that would be our objective in exam also. Let's move on to a very important property, which is the distributivity of multiplication over addition. It is also known as distributive law of multiplication over addition, or distributive property, simply distributive property. So before we understand why this property holds true, get some intuition around it, let's see what the property actually is. So what this means is that if I have a multiplication 3 into, and there is an addition inside the bracket, right? So another way to write the same expression, same arithmetic expression, is to actually distribute this multiplication. So I divide this multiplication and I distribute it inside the brackets to each of the terms of this addition. So this addition has two terms, it has two operands. I would distribute my multiplication 3 into to each of these terms, okay? And the equivalent expression would come out to be 3 into 2 plus 3 into 4. So this 2 plus 4, this 2 plus 4 came from inside the brackets, and of course I have divided 3 into 2, both of these terms, 2 and 4, both of those got the 3 into, right? So both of those terms got multiplied by 2 and addition remained as such. So this is what distributive property means. I am able to distribute the multiplication to each of the terms of the addition. Let's understand this, why this property actually works, by using a simple example. So this is an intuitive example, okay? So here what we have is 2 plus 4. What this expression says is that not only do I have 1 2 plus 4, but I have 3 of these. So I'll repeat my 2 plus 4 3 times. So instead of 1, now I have 3 2 plus 4s. Another way to look at these ducks, okay, without changing their numbers, so their numbers would remain the same. There are a total of 18 ducks, and we'll keep the 18 ducks right there, but we'll look at it in a different way, is to consider the blocks of ducks, these two ducks separately. So I consider this block and this block separately. If you think about it, how many total ducks are there in this block? It is 3 rows multiplied by 2 columns. So this comes out to be 3 into 2. What about number of ducks in the second block? It is again 3 rows into 4 columns. So this comes out to be 3 into 4. Now if I remove the ducks altogether, I find another way, the second way, or the distributive way of writing the same expression. So I can write it as 3 into 2 plus 3 into 4. This is what distributive property means. We are distributing this multiplication over each of the terms of the addition, and the addition sign remains as such. One of the common mistakes that students do is that they do not distribute the multiplication to each of the terms. So they'll forget one of the terms. So let's look at how the distribution, how to distribute it to each of the terms in little more detail. So here is an expression to distribute this multiplication 2 into to each of the terms. First I understand how many terms are there in the addition, how many terms are there in the bracket. So inside the bracket we have 3 terms, 6, 3 and 5. The way I will proceed is that I'll take first 2 and I'll push it to the first term. The second 2 will go to the second term and the third 2 will go on to the third term. And now my distribution is complete. I have to take the 2 into across all the terms of this addition, right? So there are 3 terms being added, 3 operands, and I have to take this 2 into to all of them. And now I have applied the distributive law correctly. So this of course is 12, this is 6 and this is 10, and the answer in this case will come out to be 28. Okay, previously also if you did it without the distribution, if you did it the original sum, then also the answer would come out to be 28. Let's just compute it. So with distribution, this is the answer. Without distribution, what would be the answer? Let's compute it. 6 plus 3 is 9. 9 plus 5 is 14. And of course, we have into 2 outside. So this again comes out to be 28. So those two are equivalent, right? But we are just understanding how to properly distribute the 2 inside the, when we take it inside the brackets. Let's take another example, a little more complicated example, and clearly understand this concept. Here, I'll take a slightly complicated example. I'll say 2 into 3 plus 5, and then I'll use another distributive law right here. 2 plus 4. See, the way to solve it is of course using BODMAS. We'll first remove the inner bracket. When we remove the inner bracket, the 5 will get distributed. This 5 will get distributed to each of the terms of this addition, and this becomes 2 into 3 plus 5 2s are 10 plus 5 4s are 20. Now is the 2 which will get distributed. So now we will write, we'll take this 2 and we'll distribute it to each of the terms. Remember, I cannot emphasize it enough. Again and again I am saying the same thing. Don't forget to distribute it to all the terms. Students will sometimes only take the 2 and multiply it with 3 and then say 2 into 3 plus 10 plus 20. That is wrong. You have to take this 2 to each of the terms, and the final expression would become 2 into 3 plus 2 into 10 plus 2 into 20. If you compute this, the answer would come out to be 3 2s are 6 plus 20 plus 40, which of course is 66. If you directly were to compute it, just by using the BODMAS, let's say we didn't use distributive property at all, what we would get? I'll compute it right in front of you. So this becomes 2 into, the inner term would become 3 plus 5 into 4 and 2 is 6. So 4 plus 2 is 6. 6 5s are 30. This becomes 2 into 30 plus 3 is 33, and the answer comes out to be 66. So at this point you must be wondering, why do we need distributive property at all? We can simply solve all the problems by using the BODMAS. See, the thing here is, sometimes the distributive property, as we'll see later in the examples, would make our sums, our maths easier, and in that case we would definitely want to use the distributive property. In other cases, for example in algebra, distributive property is a must. We have to use it. There is no option. Now we know that distributive property works for addition. Does multiplication distribute over subtraction as well? Let's see. Okay, so here I have a subtraction, this is a multiplication, and here I have a subtraction inside the bracket. So instead of addition, now we have subtraction. Again we'll use the same trick. This subtraction 4 minus 2 can be written as 4 minus 2, right? 4 minus 2, so 4 ducks minus 2 ducks. Of course I don't have just one of this subtraction, I have 3 of these, so I'll replicate it 3 times. This is what we did in the case of addition as well. So now we replicate it 3 times. Again, as we did before, we'll combine the blocks of ducks. So we combine this block and this comes out to be 4 into 3. Similarly, we'll combine this block of ducks and this comes out to be the first one would come out to be, let me do it again. So this first one would come out to be, there are 3 rows, so this comes out to be 3 into 4, and of course that would have been equivalent, but it is easier to, or more correct to write it as rows into column, because that's what we are following all along. So this is 3 into 4 and the total number of ducks in this block is of course 3 into 2. Now we can remove the blocks of ducks because we have those captured in the numbers. So, and we combine the minus sign and ultimately we get 3 into 4 minus 3 into 2. So notice that we have not removed or added any more ducks. The two expressions 3 into 4 minus 2 inside bracket and this expression 3 into 4 minus 3 into 2, they are exactly equivalent. That means the distributive property is definitely applicable in case of subtraction also. So distribution of multiplication over subtraction also works. Let's compute the answer and double check. So 4 minus 2 is 2. So this becomes 3 into 2, which is 6. So 6 would come from here. What happens here? This is 4 to the 12 minus 3 to the 6, and answer of course comes out to be 6. So we have verified that even in the case of subtraction, the distributive property actually holds. See, another thing which I want to bring here, a lot of students say that even in case of division, the distributive property works. So I can write expressions such as this. I can write it as 3 divided by 1 plus 3 divided by 2. This is actually completely wrong. Okay, we cannot apply the distributive property to division. It does not work at all. Okay, we can only use it for multiplication. That is the only correct way of doing it. That is the only place where we can apply it. Of course, if we had fractions, so let's say that I had fractions such as this, 1 divided by 2 into 1 plus 2. I can, because there is multiplication here, it is not division, okay, there is multiplication here. I can write this fraction as half into 2, and that would be perfectly fine. Okay, and there is a plus right in the middle. Okay, so I can distribute this fraction as long as there is multiplication here. I can write it in the distributive, I can distribute the multiplication of fraction to addition or subtraction just like normally, but I can never distribute division. Okay, so that is something that you should remember. So now it is a very interesting application of distributive law which we have been using forever, right? So if you notice, we have been doing this multiplication using this technique for a very long time. So 435 multiplied by 136. If you remember, how do we do it? So first thing I do is I multiply this entire 435 with number 6. So that's the first thing I do. So what do I get? I get 2160. Then I take the number 3 and I do the multiplication. Of course, before I start the multiplication, I add a 0 here. And then I complete my multiplication. And the multiplication is, of course, 1305. You can do the multiplication yourself. 3 multiplied by 435 would give you 1305. Now, for the last number, instead of adding just 1 0, we add 2 zeros. And then we continue the multiplication. We do 1 into 435, which of course gives us 435. Now, I go on to add these 3 terms. So I add this and this term, and I write it at the bottom. The answer of course comes out to be 59160. Okay. So that is my answer. Now, if you notice, we are using distributive property right here in this multiplication. How do we do that? Why is that the case? Let's just look at it. So the first thing we do is that we write 435 into 136. Okay. So there is a multiplication sign right here. Okay. We can omit the multiplication sign if we are putting the brackets. That is okay. Okay, it is understood that there is a multiplication sign right here. There is a multiplication. It is understood. I expand this 136. How do I do that? I say 435 multiplied by 136. I can write it as 100 plus 30 plus 6. Now if you notice what is happening here, I'm now applying the distributive property. What do I do? First term I write it as the very first one, 435 into 6. Sorry. So the very first term I'll write it as 435 into 6, and this is the term which actually went right here. Okay, so this term can be found right here. This is the term. The second term is 435. Of course, there is a plus in the middle. 435 into 30. And of course, the 0 is something that we added right here. So this 0 of this 30 was added here, and this 435 into 3 actually went right here. So this 1305, this number. What about the last one? It is pretty simple. Last one is simple. It is 435 into 100. These two zeros actually came right here. These zeros, they added, we added these zeros even before we did the multiplication. And 435 into 1, which of course is 435, we know that we took and we put it right here. Okay, so if you decompose the standard multiplication technique that we have been using so far, it is nothing but application of distributive law. Here is a simple example. Here is a simple word problem based on distributive law. See, the thing here is a family spends total of rupees 100 and rupees 4 every day. So every day, how much total money they are spending? They are spending a total of 104 rupees. So this they spend in one day. So in 7 days, how much money would they spend? It would be 7 into 104. And if you compute it, this would come out to be 728. This is pretty simple. So the problem using BODMAS, if we had to solve this problem, this is how we would solve it. But if you are specifically asked to solve this problem using distributive law, the way to do it would be to actually write it as there are total of 7 days that have to compute the amount. I have to compute the amount for 7 days. Each day we are spending 100 plus 4. Okay. So same thing I am writing. Okay, the same thing, the same expressions, the same mathematics I am writing in a different way. But now instead of computing this 104, okay, this 100 plus 4, instead of computing this value, what I am actually doing is I am applying the distributive law, because that's what I have been asked. I have been asked to solve the problem using distributive law. So this is what I will do. 7 into 100 plus 7 into 4. This comes out to be 700 plus 7 4s are 28, and of course the answer again comes out to be 728. So the answer matches, which we would expect because distributive law is very real. It works, we know that. The idea here is that if you are asked to solve the problem using distributive law, you should solve it using distributive law. Just don't use normal BODMAS in that case. So here we'll solve the problem using distributive law again. We'll try to use the distributive law to solve the problems. First thing to notice in this problem, in the very first problem, that is what we would be solving first, is to understand that we have an expression 3845 into 5. In the second case, we have an expression 769 into 25. We'll divide this 25 and write it as 5 into 5. That is the first thing we do. Then using our associative property, we multiply 769 with the first 5. That is what we are doing. So this, if we do this, if we were to do that, what we will get? 3845 into 5 plus 782 plus 769 into 5 is 3845 into 5, okay, because this 5 remains, so it has to come down into 218. That is what we will get. Now what do I do? 3845 into 5, and okay, so I'll just use different color. 3845 into 5 and 3845 into 5 are actually common. I can take it out. So I am applying using inverse of distributive property. So what do I do is I take this out, and this becomes 3845 into 5, and of course we have inside the brackets we will put these two numbers 782. The plus would come from here, and then of course 218. So we used inverse of distributive property. If we had to apply distributive property to this one, what we'll do? We'll say 3845 into 5 into 782, the first term, and then 3845 into 5 into 218, the second term, and we'll put plus in the middle. That's what we would do in distributive property. But now we are using opposite of it. Of course, the advantage of using this is inside the brackets, if you notice, what have we produced? We have produced numbers with zeros, and like we said, as we have been seeing in this class, that our objective is to produce numbers with as many zeros as possible, because that makes our job very easy. 3845 into 5, if I compute that, that comes out to be 19225. If I do 782 plus 218, and notice this is where we are getting advantage of distributive property. 782 plus 218 is 1000. So my job has suddenly become very easy, and this answer comes out to be, and these 3 zeros would just be replicated. Okay. See, this is one of the applications of distributive property, to make our calculations very simple by creating additional zeros. So here we were able to create not 1, not 2, but 3 zeros. I mean, that's really a bonus. Here is a second example. We would be using the distributive property to solve it. What we'll do is that this is 824, and this 21, I'll write it as 20 plus 1. Okay. This of course becomes 824 into 20. Notice that we have produced a 0 right here. This is the normal application of multiplication as well. Okay, so this is what we saw when we looked at the multiplication, traditional way of doing multiplication. We are doing it in here also, we are using the traditional way. And of course, this comes out to be 80 into 20. If you solve this, this would come out to be 17304. So distributive property is really important, and questions on distributive property are very simple. They don't use any trick. It is really relatively simple to solve these problems. The only thing that you should be careful when you apply distributive property is to distribute all the multiplication to all of the terms of addition, and when you take out the common factors from each of the terms of the addition. So if you take care of that, you will be able to solve all the problems of distributive property very easily. Thank you. Now let's move on to a very interesting topic which I like the most, which is the pattern found by the various numbers. So here we have a very interesting pattern found by arranging the numbers. So if I arrange the numbers in such a way that I start with number 1, and then below number 1 I put instead of 1 ball I am putting 2 balls, then in this way I can make triangles. So the total in each of these triangles forms what are known as triangular numbers. Okay, so let's just look at this. So very first triangular number is of course just 1. The next triangular number is total in this triangle, which is 2 plus 1, 3. The next triangular number is the total in this triangle, which is 1 plus 2 plus 3, which is just 6. The next triangular number would be the total in this triangle, right? So if you notice, the rows are arranged as first we have 1, then 2, then 3, and then 4. So the total in these rows is 4 plus 3 plus 2 plus 1, which comes out to be 10. The next triangular number, what we'll do? We'll increase the number of rows by 1, And how many items we'll put in this row? We'll just put 5 items. Very, very simple. So this comes out to be 10 plus 5, which is 15. So this series of numbers 1, 3, 6, 10 and 15, they are known as triangular numbers. Of course, since this is the one geometric pattern formed by the numbers, there's several such geometric patterns. So numbers which can form these kind of geometric patterns, they are known as figure 8 numbers in general. And historically, when people were more interested in geometry than arithmetic, then they used to find these patterns in all kinds of numbers. And of course, we still like them now. There are various other kinds of figure 8 numbers also. There is polygonal number, there is trapezoidal numbers, there are 3D ones also. So if you are interested in these figure 8 numbers, you should definitely check out the article on Wikipedia or also on examrace.com. So you can find the various kinds of figure 8 numbers there also. Now let's look at another kind of pattern formed by the numbers. This is simply the square pattern, right? So if I arrange the balls, number of items in a form of the square and count the total, then the total number of items comes out to be 1, 4. The next one would have how many items? 3 into 3, which is 9. If you notice, these numbers are nothing but square of natural numbers, which we would expect, right? Because this is the square of side 3. So 3 into 3 is 9. After that, we would have the square of side 4 and the total would come out to be 4 into 4, which is 16. So this is what we would expect. Of course, we are only showing the square numbers till 16. Same thing with triangular numbers. We only showed you triangular numbers till 10. But of course, triangular numbers extend beyond that also, right? Square numbers extend beyond 16 also. There is 25, then there is 6 is the 36, so on and so forth. Now, another interesting thing about these figure 8 numbers is that not only are they patterns in themselves, but sometimes the various figure 8 numbers, they also combine in interesting ways. So here is an example. We'll try to combine here, we'll try to show here that the various triangular numbers, how they combine to form the square numbers. So here are our triangular numbers. We'll just write them right here. So this is, we start with 1, then we have 3, then we have 6, and then we have 10. So these are triangular numbers. Let's see how they can combine. We can combine them to form the square numbers. So the square number 4 is formed by the triangular number 1 plus 3. So this is just 1 plus 3, which is equal to 4. The square number 9 is formed by combination of triangular number 3 plus 6. So this is just 3 plus 6, right? So very interesting. If you notice, this is very, very interesting. And of course, square number 16 is formed by, you guessed it right, triangular number 6 plus 10. So this is 6 plus 10. See, the way it works is the top portion, right? If you cut this square along the diagonal and the bottom portion, you can think about it this way, comes from the next triangular number, and the top portion, the other side of the diagonal, comes from the first square number, right? So this is how I think it works. You can obviously have other interpretations of how this would work, but this is why the combination of this one would be 6, combination of the triangular numbers to square numbers, that's how it works. So the diagonal goes to the next triangular number, and above the diagonal, whatever is remaining comes from the previous triangular number. Now the numbers themselves, arithmetic numbers themselves, they also form nice patterns. They form nice patterns of digits. Okay, so we are not looking for geometric patterns here, but we are looking for numeric patterns in this case. For example, look at the table of 11. So it goes like, right, and after that we have so on and so forth. It comes to 110, then we have 121, then we have 132. So if you look at the table of 11 itself, it is forming, the digits are forming nice pattern. Similarly, if you look at the table of 9, it goes like 9, 18, 27. So there is nice pattern to these digits. First of all, the sum of all the digits, these numbers, the sum of the digits in each of these numbers is 9. The second thing is, the way I arrive at the next multiple of 9 is by adding 1 to the 10th digit and by subtracting 1 from the unit digit. So that's another interesting pattern by the table of 9. Another interesting pattern is to look at this one. 1 into 1 is 1. 11 into 11 is equal to 121. So we know that it's 11 square. Then 111 into 111 is equal to 12321. Okay, very interesting. Then 1111 into 1111 is equal to 1234321. Right? So very interesting. The highest number here is actually just the number of digits here, right? So this is what the number of digits here just comes here, and after that and before that there is a nice pattern. We decrease the digits by 1 in each case, and we on both sides we decrease the digits by 1 in each case. So that is just another kind of pattern. So here we have a slightly complicated pattern. Let's look at that and understand why this pattern actually works. So the first case is actually trivial, so let's not look at that. Let's start with the second one. See, one way to think about how this works is actually to use our favorite distributive law right here. So I can write 9 as 10 minus 1. I'm allowed to do that, of course. And then we'll have plus 2. Okay, so this is what I would get from this side. If I expand this, what do I get? I get 120. This comes out to be 120, and then there will be minus 12, and then there will be plus 2. So if you notice, these minus 12 and plus 2, they would actually come out to be minus 10. Okay, so the idea is that the units digit would zero out, and that is what is happening in each of these cases. The unit digits after this subtraction would just zero out. What about after zeroing out the unit digits? What are we left with? We are left with 120 minus 10. Okay, so now this 10, this 1 would get subtracted from this 2. That is what we have, right? We have this is the tens digit and this is the tens digit, so this 1 would just get subtracted from 2, and we will get 110. Let's see what happens in the next number. So in this number also, if we do the distributive law, we'll come up with 1, 2, 3 into 10 minus 1, and then plus 3. This would become 1230 minus 123, and then of course there will be plus 3. Again the unit digit becomes 0. Very, very simple. Okay, and the digits which are here, each of the digits, like for example, if you compare the tens digit, the tens digit here is one less than the tens digit here. The tens digit here is 1 less than the tens digit here. So obviously when I do this subtraction, I will have 1110. So it is very easy to understand, or in this way you'll have to show in actual, if you're being asked, it is very easy to show that why this pattern is actually working. This pattern, let's just move on one more digit. Okay, and we'll just do it directly now because we have become expert in this pattern. So we'll just do it directly. Would yield 12340 minus, what will I have? I'll have 1230. Okay, again if you notice, each of the digits here is 1 less than the corresponding digit here. So when this subtraction happens, what will I get? I will get 111, and there will be one more 1 and then 0. Okay, so this is how this pattern is actually working. Very, very easy to show, right? If you do a few calculations, if you do it a few times, it's very easy to understand as well as to show why this pattern actually works. Now let's move on to a little more complicated pattern, but it's not so complicated, especially if you look at this pattern and then we go on to this pattern. So this pattern we already know, it just works. We'll see why this pattern works by understanding this pattern, right? So this pattern we have already understood. Now we'll derive the second pattern by using the first pattern. So here what we'll do is that to go from the first pattern to the second pattern, here we have 9 ones and here we have 8 ones. So I just do minus 1. Of course, if I do minus 1 on both sides, on this side we'll get 1 into 8 plus 1. On this side we'll get 10 minus 1, which is equal to 9. So this is just 10 minus 1. Similarly, if I do it on this one, what happens? Let's see. This is 12 nines, and here we have 12 nines, and here we have just 8 12s, right? And here we had 9 12s. So I'll just subtract minus 12, and this comes out to be 110 minus 12. If you do the subtraction, this is what you would get. Here we have 9 123s. Okay, so there are 9 123. How many 123s do I have? 9. Here how many 123s I have? Just 8. So we have to subtract. To go from this pattern to this pattern, we have to subtract 123 from both sides. So if I subtract 123 from 1110 minus 123, this is the pattern that this is the number that we'll get. So this is how we know the second pattern, the way it works, by using the first pattern. So we have derived that. Now you must be thinking that why do we have to study these patterns at all, right? What's the use? Now some of these patterns are especially useful in making our additions and subtractions and multiplications, making those very, very easy. So one of the things that repeatedly you will have to use to make complicated additions easier is technique of completing the tens. Very, very important. Okay, so definitely look at it closely. So here we have the first example, 23 plus 64 plus 27. So notice that if I add 23 and 64, my addition becomes complicated. It is a little bit difficult. Now the same thing, the same addition, I can make simple by completing the tens, first using the distributive property and commutative property, and then completing the tens. So let's first apply the commutative property right here. So this 64 plus 27, I can write it as 27 plus 64 by virtue of the commutative property. Then by virtue of the associative property of addition, we can associate this 27 with this addition. So let's just complete this one, 23 plus 27, and then we'll add 64. So if you notice, if I add 23 and 27, I get 50. There is a 0 in this 50. So all this work we did just to create that 0, and because of that 0, our addition, the rest of the addition has become very, very simple, because I can simply add 4, and 6 plus 5 is actually 11. So this comes out to be 114. So that is what we are doing. We are trying to arrange the various terms of our addition so as to complete the zeros, to get as many zeros as possible. Let's take another example. So I'll clear out this example, and then we'll just look at the other example, which is 25 plus 66 plus 28. So now if you notice, in this case, we don't really have two terms which can be combined to form zeros. So what do? We create the term. So in this case, what I do is that I write 28 as 25 plus 3. I can always do that. Now if you notice, this 25 and this 25 can really be combined. So we use our distributive property, our commutative property, not distributive, associative property and commutative property to combine this 25 and this 25 together. And of course, the rest of it is 66 plus 3. Now we can combine 63 plus 3. This forms 69. From here, we'll get what? 25 plus 25, which is 50. Again, we got a 0, right? So 0 is our friend here. We are trying to produce as many zeros as possible. So 50 plus 69, of course, this gives us an answer of 119 very, very easily. So in the addition, we use this technique of completing the tens. In multiplication, we use a similar technique of producing zeros. We are trying to produce as many zeros in our multiplication as possible. So what is the technique? See, the thing is, if I have a 5 in my multiplication and I multiply it by even number, okay, let's say 2, the answer I get is 10. So I have produced a 0 in this multiplication, right? So that is the most important thing. I have produced a 0 in this multiplication. Anytime I have a 5 and I multiply it with an even number, I would get a 0 as a result of that multiplication, and that is the technique we are going to use. So let's start with our first example, which is relatively simple. I have a number 824 into 25. So here this 25 has a 5, so we just need an even number to actually multiply with this 25. What do? I divide this 824 by 4. I get 206 into 4 into 25. I use my associative property to associate this 4 with this multiplication sign. So I'll do this 4 into 25 first. This 4 into 25 is nothing but 100. Now I am 206 into 100. So this multiplication by 100 is very easy. All I have to do is, let's just write it down, 206 into 100. To multiply the 100, all I have to do is simply copy over these zeros. And since there is just a 1 here, I do 206 into 1. And from here, this term, I get 206. So multiplication by zeros is very easy, and that is why we are producing as many zeros as possible. So this would be our answer. Very simple. Let's just look at another example. In this case, what we'll do is that we'll try to do 96 into 125. So if you look at this example, here again we don't really we have a number 5 here. We'll have to create some small even number to combine with this 125. Okay, we can combine this entire thing, but that wouldn't serve much purpose. So we are trying to extract a small even number from here. So we know that 12 8s are 96. So just write it like that. So we'll write 96 as 12 into 8, and of course 125 remains as such. Now what do? We combine this 8 and 125 by virtue of our associative property, and this 8 into 125 comes out to be just 1000. Okay, so we have not created 1, not 2, but 3 zeros. Okay, one of the things you'll have to remember is that 4 into 25 is 100, 8 into 125 is 1000, and of course 2 into 5 is 10. So you'll have to remember some of these things, and then of course this just comes out to be 12,000. We simply copy over these 3 zeros right here. So that is another example where we have just produced zeros in multiplication to make our job easier. The next example is slightly tricky, not that much hard, but slightly tricky. Here we have 64. So we just write 64 as 32 into 2, and then 35 we'll write it as 5 into 7. So we have extracted 5 from 35, right? So from this 35 we have extracted 5, and from this 64 we have extracted 2, and now we combine this 2 and 5 together, and we combine this 32 and 7 together. 32 and 7 together. So 2 and 5 when I combine, what do I get? Just 10. And 32 into 7 when I do, I get 224. So this comes out to be 224 into 10, which is equal to 2240. Now next examples, in the next two examples, we look at some other twists, distributive property, and how we can use it to our advantage, again by recognizing the patterns in numbers. So here is an example. Suppose I have to do this multiplication. Now this multiplication looks pretty tough. Okay, this looks pretty hard to do. Let's just write this 99 in a different way. This 99 we can write it as 100 minus 1. Okay, and this 84 is written as such. Now from that pretty complicated, now we apply our distributive law, and we have converted our pretty difficult multiplication to a pretty simple subtraction. Okay, so this is what we have done. We have converted our multiplication to a subtraction. This comes out to be 8400 minus 84. If you compute this, this would come out to be 8316. Okay, now instead of 99, what if there was 98 here? If there was 98, very simple, we'll just do, instead of 100 minus 1, we'll just do 100 minus 2. Instead of this 84, what will we get? We'll get 84 into 2, which is 168. And then from here, we'll just subtract 168, and the answer we'll get is 8232. Okay, so that those are the two basic techniques that we can use to make our jobs easier, make our calculations simple. Another thing, if you notice here, is that here I am using minus sign. We can also use plus sign. So here is an example. Let's say that I had 84 into, instead of 99, I had 102. Then what can I do? I can write this 102 as 100 plus 2. And from there on, we can again use our distributive property to make our jobs, to make our calculation simple. This complicated multiplication we can now complete in the form of an addition. So with this, we cover a lot of things in this class. Of course, there are more advanced topics to be studied, especially if you are preparing for Olympiad, and don't worry, we'll cover all of those slowly and gradually. So stay subscribed, and if you have doubts, don't hesitate to put them in the comments. Some of the topics are more figure eight numbers, right? What are other figure eight numbers? Those are important for Olympiad. Questions are often asked on the patterns. What happens to numbers below 0, right? Do we have any numbers below 0? So whole numbers we know go on to till 0, that's the minimum whole number. What about numbers below 0? Are there any numbers? Yes, of course there are numbers called integers, and we'll study them in the subsequent classes. What about the higher numbers, right? Till what is the highest possible number? So those kinds of questions are answered when we understand the concept of infinity. And last but not the least, real numbers. Those are very, very important concept of arithmetic, real numbers, and then we have complex numbers. So those are the real basis. Those are the real sort of most important things in the foundations of arithmetic, and those also we will study. Thank you.